Hello, this is Justin Ruger with Accessible Beekeeping and More. We have today our guest, Christy Hemenway. How are you today, Christy?
I'm doing great, Justin.
So I heard a lot of positives about you from a mutual friend, Lori Shiflett, who lives close to us um, close to me in Virginia. And she was telling me about your top bar hives, your books, and all the things that you do for the beekeeping community. I would like to start with how you actually got into beekeeping, and you don't worry, you don't have to tell us how long.
I moved to Maine, first of all, on the first day of 2006. And by July, I had been out to a local farm to see somebody hive a package of bees. I didn't really go because it was bees. I went because I had a new camera and I wanted to take pictures. But that led to, I had been interested in alpacas, and in the process of working up a thing I called Gold Star alpacas. Not like there's any pattern there in the naming, right? Gold Star alpacas wanted to learn how to shear. And so I partnered up with a local alpaca farm, and we went out to their barn and gave a couple of alpacas a very bad haircut. But when we were done, he reached over onto a ledge in the barn and grabbed a jar, and he handed it to me and said, "Here, thanks for your help." And I literally looked at this jar and I said, "What is this?" And he said, "It's honey." I was like, "What?" But it was not what you see, in a squeezy bear in the grocery store honey. It was something harvested from his own hives. And I said, "Really? Where'd it come from?" And he said, "From my bees." And I said, "What? You have bees?" And he started going, "Wait now, slow down, slow down." So that was Al Maloney, and he was the webmaster for Knox-Lincoln County Beekeepers here in Maine. And so he promised that he would send me a link when they told him when bee school was going to be so he could post it on the website. And so I went to bee school, as you do, and I started learning about the Langstroth hive. And there was just something about it that didn't really appeal to me, in addition to the fact that it's heavy and awkward to inspect. And so by the end of the year, I was pretty much a fan of top bar hives. And the next thing you know, it was Gold Star honeybees. And so that was 2009. I started keeping bees, and I started running Gold Star honeybees as a service. So my clients wanted bees, but they didn't want to be the beekeeper. So I would bring a hive and I would park it at their place, and it was never migratory pollination. It was stable, sit still bees while the beekeeper traveled up and down the coast of Maine taking care of them. And by the time I got that up to 10 customers, and they were, well, I can say they were all the way in Lincolnville and Cumberland, which doesn't tell you anything. But if I had got in my car and driven to each hive, got out and touched it, and got back in the car and tried to get to all hives in a day, it would have taken the whole day. So it was time to pivot off of that. And at that point, I had been prototyping the Gold Star top bar hive for a couple of years by the time I decided to change out of the service. And so now I manufacture the hives. I was asked by New Society publishers to write the first book. I went back and asked them if I could please write the second book, because everybody wanted to know about swarming. And I had stopped just short of swarming in the first book, because it is said that bees never swarm their first year, which we now don't put any credence to that sentence. But then I ended up writing Advanced Top Bar Beekeeping to cover swarms and stuff like that. And then I've been selling bees and hives and talking to folks like you, and basically enjoying honeybees since.
They've taken you far then.
It's been a journey. It's really been a journey. And when I look back at how long I've been doing this, it's fascinating to me, because I never held a job any longer than about 2 years, but I've been doing Gold Star honeybees since 2009. So that was a big change up for me too. To be self-employed was part of the joy of it, but bees was so compelling.
It's obviously something you're passionate about.
Yeah, true. True, true, true. Most people say that because I'll get all excited.
So tell us about Top Bar Hive. I personally have not had the pleasure of using one, so I don't know how it works. Lori has tried to explain it to me a little bit. I'm actually getting a couple donated to our experimental hive here in Virginia from a fellow in Maryland. So how does Top Bar Hive differ and from a Langstroth hive, and how would it help somebody with a disability?
The most noticeable difference is that it's a horizontal hive as opposed to a vertical hive. And there's
Okay.
no lifting or stacking of boxes or any heavy duty got to horse the pieces around. So originally my thought was very focused on the beeswax. After I learned that we'd been treating for varroa mites in hives since the middle 1980s, with chemicals that were being absorbed into the wax, I was just adamant that no, that cannot be. And so I wanted a situation where there was no foundation being used and the bees were making their own natural beeswax. And then there was the added benefit, lo and behold, that you didn't have to lift a 90-pound box in order to inspect the bees. So the Gold Star model of a top bar hive sits up on legs, or you could take and put any top bar hive on a stand so that you could wheel up to it in a wheelchair, and it's quite accessible. It's right at table height. So that part of it is just kind of the nature of the beast. It's almost as if it was designed for that to be simpler for people in a wheelchair. The only obstacle that you really encounter is the lid, and I don't sell them with a hinge on the lid, but you can certainly hinge them, and then all you got to do is roll up to it, open it up the lid, and you're in. Did that
That
make
is
sense?
actually,
If you've never seen one, I understand it's quite different from the Langstroth style, but you can lift one bar at a time. So you're picking up a top bar, you've got one piece of comb in your hand, and there's very little weight to that, and it's easier on the bees, and you can put it right back into the hive. It's all right in front of you, just like sitting at a table.
how many pounds does one of those top bars weigh?
If it were fully drawn comb and full of honey, maybe 7 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah, right. As opposed to 90 on a box.
9, yeah.
Yeah, it's very significant. And you can, I mean, I know people who manage their Langstroth hives by having a spare box and then lifting each frame and putting it in the box so that you're not lifting the whole box, but it's obviously designed to, be lifted as a box. And that's why you see people complaining at beekeeping conferences and saying things like, yeah, there's no such thing as a beekeeper without a bad back. It's really difficult. It's heavy. So,
which is something we're trying to get away from.
Exactly. So, and that aspect of it was just sort of, built into the whole hive design. So it is kind of naturally situated for helping out with that.
Is there a traditional top bar design? And if there is, does your hive differ from it? Does that question make sense?
Yes, it does. A traditional top bar hive might be said to be essentially a trapezoidal tank. So you got sides and the ends, and then the bars that go across it with some sort of roof over the top of it. And typically, I think before I started doing these commercially, they had an end entrance. The Gold Star hive has what we call a side center entrance. So if you look at the hive that it's long ways this way, the bars are going like this, then the entrance, this is hard to do in reverse. The end of the hive and the bees come in at the long end, as opposed to the Gold Star hive is long this way, and the entrances are in the center of the long side. Did that make sense? One of the differences there is that the the more traditional one, or the older style, I don't really know how to refer to it, but the end entrance hive has got a landing board, and the side center entrance has 3 1-inch round holes, and the bees fly up and they either hover and then shoom, just shoot right in there, or they land on the box and then they walk in. But it's much different, like, to look at from the from the outside of the hive. For the beekeeper, it looks much different.
So the Gold Star hive that you designed has the landing boards?
It does not. It has what they call
It
a
does not.
side
It has
center
the
entrance.
holes. Sorry.
Right.
Sorry.
So the advantage to the bees and the beekeeper of that is that it also has 2 follower boards. So 2 boards that take the place of where 2 top bars would go, that act as dividers. And so you can use those. We call them follower boards because they kind of follow the size of the colony. As the bees, if here's a top bar, and then the bees are drawing comb, and then you got a few blank bars, and then you've got this other follower board, that's the space they're in. Because you wouldn't want to throw a package of bees into a box that's about 4 feet long and just say, have at it. They just don't do well in that situation. Typically, a Langstroth hive is started in one brood box. It's about 10 bars. Maybe if you're using mediums, they're 8s. So containing their space is what those follower boards are for. But let's say they're booming and they have filled the whole box, and you want to split them because it looks like they're going to swarm. Well, now you can take those 2 follower boards, do some manipulations. You got to split up your resources and make sure where your queen cells are to do a split. But those follower boards can drop in the middle, and then there are entrances on the back of the hive, so that one hive uses the ones in the front and one hive uses the one on the other back corner, and now you've got 2 hives in the same box. It's a temporary thing, but you can split right into the same box, and they
let
both
them do the work.
Right. Yeah. So
the books that you wrote, the Thinking Beekeeper, and I believe it was the Thinking Beekeeper 2.
I wanted to call it The Thinking Beekeeper Thinks Again.
That's beautiful.
My publisher didn't think that was a good idea. I thought it was funny in all kinds of ways, and I thought beekeepers would get it too. But that was really my response to people writing books like Beekeeping for Dummies, and even in one case, Beekeeping for the Complete Idiot, which just seems insulting to me. In a world where we're so worried about the bees, the people who are wanting to keep bees are not dummies. They get it, that bees are important, and they want to know what to do, and they want to know why to do it, so that it makes sense in other situations. So that if you know fact A about bees and it's relevant in 2 or 3 different scenarios, you have the why behind the how. And so that was my focus, was to treat people with some respect and to realize that thinking people are who keep bees now. It's not just a throw them out in the backyard thing now.
Do your target audience, is it someone who has never set foot in an apiary before? Is it somebody that has worked with bees and has some general knowledge? Or what was your target audience for the first book?
The book was really aimed at someone who had never kept top bar hives.
Okay.
And so that means it could have been a total novice to beekeeping. But I have also had students in class and a lot of feedback from people who had only kept Langstroth hives and were completely surprised to see just how different it is. In fact, on that same subject, the Maine state apiarist some years ago was out in my bee yard. Finally, we tried to get that together for a couple of years, and it finally happened. And he was very surprised. He was asking me questions about things that I assumed he would have known, but he'd just never seen it play out when the bees are in charge of drawing all the wax, because foundation makes for a very different scenario. Everything about the whole beekeeping is different when the bees are on foundation, as well as the Langstroth frame surrounding the comb. That's a little bit problematic for the bees as well, because they like to make swarm cells on the edge of the comb, and they can't really get to it with the frame that surrounds it.
How long is the typical top bar hive frame?
Well, let's take the word typical first. One of the things that I was doing when I was designing the hive and was looking at other examples of what was out there, which was Phil Chandler over in England of BioBees, Michael Bush in Nebraska, Les Crowder out in New Mexico, Marty Hardison in Colorado, and lots of them had tried to match it to the Langstroth hive, except for Phil. He landed on 17 and a half inches. And to me, it was a little bit of a pernicious thing that I did on purpose. I purposely made it not fit in a Langstroth hive. So the bar is 17 and a half inches long. It's 1 3/8 wide. That's wide enough that it leaves bee space between the combs when the bees make their own natural comb. And it also prevented, unless they were going to be inventive about it, anybody from trying to put Langstroth equipment, specifically foundation, into a top bar hive. Because it was really, for me, it was all about the wax. I can do a whole talk on just, it's all about the wax. To me, that's so important. The size of the cells matters. The cleanliness of the wax matters. Where they put it so that they can manage the heat and the ventilation inside the hive. All of that is put together by, things that only bees know. And for us to mess with it seems cavalier to me. So it was really all about trying to keep foundation out of top bar hives. So the answer to your question is the bar is 17 and a half inches long and 1 3/8 wide.
And there's multiple of them for 4 feet.
Yes. Here's a funny thing. I call it a 30 bar hive, but in fact, when UPS started charging a hefty surcharge for any box that measured even a smidge over 48 inches, I made the hive a tiny little smidge shorter so the box would be 48 inches. So now it comes with spacers, and spacers are what you put between bars where they're going to build comb or honeycomb, not brood comb, but honeycomb, because they'll make that wider than they will brood comb. And so I doubled the amount of spacers so that if you need to, you can fill a whole bar's worth of space in with these little spacer strips, because it really only holds 29 unless it's very dry and the wood has shrunk up.
This is amazing.
It's funny, the little things that drive decisions. I mean, UPS, really? But yeah, so it's about 4 feet long and it holds 29 and a smudge of bars. 30 bars come with the hive. There's a spare. So yeah, somehow people tend to lose 1 or 2 here and there. So there's an extra one in there.
And you do not treat the bees, you said?
I believe that you have got to do something about varroa mites. The varroa mite, having jumped from an Asian honeybee that had a different life cycle and could live with the mite pressure. When that happened, that left our little European honeybees sort of defenseless. So I think that promoting swarming, not keeping bees in order to make them swarm, but supporting their natural swarming process, causes a brood break, and that helps to lower the mite load. But they don't swarm every year, and people often split them in order to not have to try to chase them down out of a tree, which would be very important if you're in a wheelchair, for crying out loud. So let's split them, and but that way you don't get that brood break. And so if you are going to do something about mites, I would recommend oxalic acid. I've only ever done it with dribbling with a syringe. You got to get so many cc's in the seams between the bees. Because to me, remember how I said it was all about the wax?
Yes.
Oxalic acid does not get absorbed into the wax. But everything we've used to treat bees up until about now does. And that's how we contaminated all the foundation, which is what started me on this hair on fire thing in the first place. It's all about the wax.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because that was one of my next questions. I was under the assumption that it does not go into the wax and that honeybees actually produce a little bit of acylic acid themselves.
They do. You find it in honey. And one of the things that really broke my heart when I realized, like, we're calling this a treatment, but it comes from shamrocks. I love shamrocks. I raised them, that's a house plant to me. I'm Irish. There's a lot of good reasons to be sort of pro oxalis. And so the fact that it worked to take care of varroa mites was pretty pleasing. The other thing about it is when you've got the hive in a situation where it's broodless or as close to broodless as you can get it, it's 95% effective. I mean, it really knocks them out. You really do. You get your money's worth for using oxalic. The challenge with it is that you need to do it when there's no brood, because the minute a bee puts a cap on a cell, that larva is like protected from nuclear war. Whatever those cappings are made out of, nothing gets through there. And so you need to get into that broodless situation in order to make it be effective.
Okay, if a larva had a varroa mite that was capped inside with it, and the acylic acid, for our listeners out there who may not know it, would not actually treat for that varroa mite.
Exactly. Because it's tucked away inside there, and the oxalic won't affect it. But if there's nothing capped, then the oxalic gets to everywhere it needs to go and gets to the mites.
Is there any other treatments you do aftermarket, or essential oils, or anything special that you do with your top bar hives?
Some essential oils are pretty useful. There's a small list. It's not as extensive as I wish it was on using various essential oils on different situations. But to be honest, the only thing that I've ever seen, other than a situation with wax moths and one situation with some chalk brood, I have not had the misfortune to have a lot of medical issues, treatment issues with the bees. So I worry a lot about varroa mites because they are just pernicious things and they will take a hive apart for sure. But the rest of it hasn't been part of my experience that deeply.
Speaking about small hive beetles and wax moths, right?
Yeah.
Before the HOA said that our bees were livestock and we actually had to move them off of our backyard property, we did really good without any infestations for the first 3 years. And then the last one, the wax moths just took over.
Really? Wax moths are a concern because they're what they call opportunistic. If the hive is strong, the wax moths won't be able to get a foothold. But if the hive is weakened in any way and those guys can get in there, then they can pretty much do what they want and the bees are defenseless against it. Or if you've got a hive sitting around with wax in it and it's open and the wax moth can get in there and get started, then yeah, that's they're gross, wax moth.
Especially the larva.
Yeah, exactly. And small hive beetle is pretty bad too, but they're luckily, speaking as a Mainer, small hive beetle has not made its way all the way up here. The furthest north I've heard of small hive beetle getting so far has been in Massachusetts. And that's close to Maine, but we don't see too much of that up here.
Your entrances, the way you designed your entrances for your Gold Star top bar hive, do you think that has anything to do with the control of wax moths? Because there's not a long strip versus 3 small holes.
I think it's probably easier to close it up. When you have that long entrance in a Langstroth hive, it's just a bigger space, whereas when you've got 3 holes and you can cork them, that makes a big difference. But mostly it's probably more about the area that's accessible for the critters and the pests to get in. Just like you could do the math, like that's a bigger hole than this one. So in that way, it's probably helpful. I doubt that there's any other magic to it.
Your coming back to the books, your second book you said you picked up from Swarming, where you stopped off in the first book. Right. So is your second book more for the intermediate person who's already been through your first book?
That was the thinking at the time, but I have had enough people call, first-year beekeepers, call and say, my bees are swarming year one. I mean, it's astonishing that the bees are doing it, but it's happening pretty frequently. And so I would say that you could describe it as intermediate as far as your learning process goes, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a year two thing. It could happen in year one.
Is it completely about swarming, or do you go into other details in your book as well?
Well, there's a big long scree in there from me about how they said nicotine was good for you too. And so I went off on the whole neonicotinoid pesticides, which I think are hideous. When you're painting a systemic pesticide on a seed, now the cell structure and the nectar and the pollen and everything that a bee would go to that plant for is now full of nicotine. I'm like, that messes with your central nervous system. When you're a bee, your central nervous system is your GPS. That's how you know how to get home. And that was often considered to be part of the colony collapse disorder situation, because colony collapse was strange in that the bees were gone, not dead, not laying there where you could pick up a dead body and study why it died. They were gone. And so the logic behind that was, okay, they went out and they encountered some crop that had been treated with neonics, and they were so affected by it that they just lost their bearings and never came home. So now you have empty hives with a queen and maybe some bees that haven't been old enough to forage yet. So, yeah.
You are well stocked.
That I go off on. But the thing that's really probably most interesting and useful, and this would be for anybody that was new to top bar hives, not just bees, but I made up some names for different types of splits. Right? You've heard about a walk-away split, right? Mm-hmm. In your case, that would be a roll-away split, right? You go and you divide the bees in half. They haven't made any queen cells yet. You're well in advance of them being prepared to swarm, but you would like to split the hive because you'd like to have an additional hive. So you divide it and then you just walk away. Whoever has a queen and goes on as per normal, and whoever doesn't have a queen makes a queen. Yeah, so that's an easy one. That's a walk away split. And then there's one in there called the procrastinator split, and that's where you're just like, oh, I hope they're not going. I hope they're not going. Oh, shoot, they're going. And then you got to like hurry up and, get your act together with another box for them and get them divided up and that sort of thing. So it explains a lot of how to go about it based on what you want. If you want more bees, you work it to promote that. And if you like, if I have to put another beehive on this property, I'm getting divorced, well, then maybe the best thing to do is to try to prevent them from swarming down, so you can kind of open up the hive to try to give them the sense that they've got more space, which tends to at least slow them down. The swarm impulse is quite the prime directive, but they will slow down if they have lots of space.
You are a walking encyclopedia of bee knowledge. I really enjoyed you being on.
Bees are fun. Yay, bees, as we like to say.
Do you have any last minute advice or tips about the top bar hive that you would tell somebody who was just getting into it, or somebody that had a disability that might be interested in, purchasing? Like, well, first, do you ship your hives throughout the United States or just local?
No, I ship through the entire United States. Hive kits and all of the tools. It's goldstarhoneybees.com. And until Friday of this week, we're actually shipping bees. Next week will be our last ship date for 3-pound package bees, treatment free, small cell, natural wax, perfect for top bar hives. Also works in other hives. But yeah, next week is our last ship week. So hit the website and take a look. There's a presentation that you can download called "The How and Why of Keeping Bees in Top Bar Hives." That goes into a little bit about the wax and the cell size and that sort of stuff, and why that matters. And as far as a person who has a disability, specifically a wheelchair, probably the best thing to do is just to set it up in your apiary so that there's room to get between the hives with the chair. And if they were, I keep trying to talk with my hands, it doesn't work. If they were facing like 4 of them, if you had that many, into a courtyard so that you could get into the center, and then you could work around the edges of do the hives in a circle to do inspections, that would just be one of the more efficient ways to go about it.
Yeah, we actually, my nonprofit, Accessible Beekeeping, just received its 501c3 status, and we're working on building an experimental apiary here that has, Layens Hive, Langstroth, Top
Right.
Bar, Long Lang, and going through from my point of view as somebody in a wheelchair, what's easy, what's beneficial, what's hard, a Sylvanian AZ hive as well. So I really appreciate you coming on and giving us a little crash course on Top Bar hives and giving us information on where we can go to learn more.
I appreciate you having me on, Justin. It's been great.
Yes. Thank you so much.
You bet. See ya.
See ya.